Hey everybody, welcome back to the Texas Legacy Support Network Show, Season 1, Episode 4. Today my guest is the quarterback from the 1963 Texas Longhorns National Championship team. He is also one of the busts that's going in at Darrell K. Royal Stadium we talked about in Episode 1. Yes, I am talking about none other than Duke Carlisle. I really enjoyed reading his book, Longhorns and Tall Tales, subtitled, Winning During the Royal Era Took Grit and a Good Sense of Humor. Well, I discovered Duke Carlisle's sense of humor in those pages, and you can too. The link will be in the show notes, but you can also find it on Amazon. But I discovered Duke Carlisle himself in this interview. You're really going to enjoy our conversation right after these messages.
Our last game, Friday Night Legends, was a big hit, and now you can play the greatest college football teams of all time against each other. Before now, if you wanted to see the 2019 LSU Tigers play the 2001 Miami Hurricanes squad, you were stuck with only your imagination. Not anymore. This new game allows you to play those dream matchups. 1945 Army Black Knights, considered by many to be the greatest team in the history of college football. 2014 Ohio State Buckeyes, featuring Ezekiel Elliott, head coach Urban Meyer, and offensive coordinator Tom Herman. 2005 Texas Longhorns knocked off number 1 ranked USC for their 4th national championship, and so many more. Saturday Legends is that game. What are you waiting for? Get in the game. Saturday Legends.
Get your copy at www.saturdaylegends.com.
Are you looking for a podcast network that talks Texas by Texans? Well, check us out. You're already listening to us, but go to the website, LoneStarPodcast.com. You can also find us on every big podcast platform. LSPN, we have shows in business, entertainment, marketing, music, of course, sports. We have some of the best sports podcasts in the state of Texas, ranging from high school football all the way up to pro basketball. So check us out online, LoneStarPodcast.com. That's the LSPN on every major podcast platform.
Now, the TLSN is not associated with the University of Texas. Instead, it is a free educational, historical site that is highly insightful about some of those great University of Texas athletics stories. In this show, we take some of the great visuals, the great stories, the great history that is contained on TexasLSN.org, and we try to bring them to life. We bring them to life by adding the voices of the people involved in the stories, as well as the people who were there for those stories. Anytime you hear something on the TLSN show, rest assured you can find it on TexasLSN.org. On this extremely user-friendly site, you will find much more information about the stories we cover here in the show. We are combining the best of both worlds. You've got the detailed narrative on TexasLSN.org, and here you get the audio direct from those people involved. My job is to bring the stories from TexasLSN.org to life and do that with audio. Your job is to enjoy the stories you hear and then dig in over at TexasLSN.org. All right, everybody, join me in welcoming Duke Carlisle to the show. Duke, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Chris.
Oh, you bet. I'm so excited to get to talk to you. And in reading your book, which we will talk about later in the show, you seem a pretty humble guy, but what you did, what you were part of with UT was a historic time.
Well, that's right. And what you just said, is really the key to it. I was part of, and it's easy to get things skewed, particularly if you're the quarterback or you make a play or two. But there were tremendous football players my whole time at Texas, and then to finish with a national championship, it was a group of guys that played hard and played smart and wanted it badly. I've said this a lot of times. The those of us that were seniors had been around 2 years earlier, our sophomore year, when our team was, after 8 games, we were 8-0 and comfortably number 1 in the country. Our 9th game of a 10-game season was against TCU at home, at our home. We were 25-point favorites, and we lost the game 6-0, and we lost the national championship that afternoon. So we had that in our mind for a couple of years, and we kept repeating to each other over and over, we need to be careful. You can't take it for anything for granted, and go hard. So fortunately it worked out that way.
Right. So let's, if you don't mind, let's jump back to where you were born, Texas native, and where you grew up. Tell us about that.
I was born in Kaufman, Texas. So about a town about 30 miles east of Dallas. Small town. When I was growing up, it was probably it was less than 3,000 people. One fortunate thing I had in my athletic career was there was at my elementary school, there was our principal who had 2 daughters, but a true strong interest in athletics, and he coached a team in whatever sport was in season and organized it. Figured out a way for us to get sweatshirts with numbers on them and set up some games. So I was playing organized football because of him, and I was in the 4th grade, and that was a helpful start to me. After the football season in 8th grade, I moved to Athens, which was another 35, 40 miles to the east, and finished high school there.
So talk about your high school football career. How good was that Athens team?
We had some good teams. Our last 2 years, my junior and senior year, we were district champions. When I was a senior, we went to the quarterfinals, won all but I think 3 games or 4 in those 2 seasons. So we had good teams, some good players, several that went on and played college ball.
Definitely. And speaking of college, the next step for you was the recruiting process, which was quite a bit different than it is right now, correct?
That's right. There were unlimited visits to coaches could make to athletes. Yeah, we saw a lot of the recruiters. When I was a sophomore in high school, we had a player that was one of the best linemen in the state, strongly recruited by everybody, including Oklahoma. And at that time, I had, because my dad had taken me to the Texas-Oklahoma game a few years earlier, I had an attachment to Oklahoma, maybe because they were winners. They had won, or they were in the middle of a 47-game winning streak, and I became a fan. So this high school guy was 2 years older. When the recruiter would come see him, he early on said, I tell you, a guy that really likes your school, likes your team, is Carlisle, who's a sophomore. So the guy name was Eddie Crowder, who'd been a great quarterback at Oklahoma. So over the next several years, Eddie, my family, there's no telling how many visits we had, and became really great friends. And I thought most of that time that I would be going to Oklahoma. But my senior year, I met Coach Royal, talked to him, and meanwhile, things were shifting around. Oklahoma was not winning all their games. Texas beat them when I was a junior in high school, an upset. And then when I was a senior, Texas just beat them. And so I changed during my senior year and decided that I wanted to go to Texas. And how those things you can't see the future, but what a fortunate choice to go. Oklahoma was stopping their win streak, and Coach Royal was putting together seasons that in the early 60s, he got one national championship and almost two more. So it was an interesting time to be a high schooler, and I didn't really enjoy the recruiting process, but knowing those two schools that I liked, it made it interesting.
So it's interesting that a former Oklahoma player is who convinced you to no longer go to Oklahoma and come to UT.
That's right. He had been a great player at Oklahoma, and he asked me when I was visiting with him. He said, "What other schools you consider?" And I said, "Well, really Oklahoma." And he said, "We've beaten them the last 2 years, and I can promise you we're going to continue to beat them regularly." And I left there thinking, I guess anybody would say that, but he really sounds like he believed it. So that was that's what was happening there in my last year was pivotal to my decision, and probably mainly his influence.
Nice. And a lot of people talk about Coach Royal as a game technician, but talk about his strength as a recruiter, because if you look at that freshman class, it was solid.
That's right, and he had done that from the time he arrived. When the year before he got there, Texas had record was 1-9, and he quickly started bringing in players and doing a good job of coaching and getting really top assistant coaches that worked hard, were smart, and gave us kind of guidance that we needed. And so there was there were a tremendous number of outstanding football players from the state that were there when I was there, and he continued to bring them in. As a matter of fact, I would say Coach Royal had probably by the mid-'60s probably the dominant program in the nation.
Nice. And talk about, I guess, the uncertainty of being a freshman at a time when he brought in so many players. What did you face in terms of competition?
That's true. That at that time you could just you could bring them in as basically, I guess, as many as you wanted. We had between 50 and 60 maybe, and that's right. It's a frightening feeling to be a freshman and to go into what is one of the stronger programs and have already read the names of some of the quarterbacks that are going to be there. And I think there were, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of us that were quarterbacks. So you think, well, I gotta do the best I can and hope for the best. And what happens is in those days, they would immediately switch some of those quarterback recruits to other positions. So we had some of that happening, and also back in those days, guys could play both ways. So some of the quarterbacks and halfbacks played defense, and some played offense. So, but it was there was a lot of competition, and then you knew the next year there was going to be another load of great players coming in who you'd have to start all over with that competition. That's when you're a high schooler, you want to play on one of the best teams, but you also want to get to play. So it does cause a little bit of a dilemma, I suppose, sometimes. But it worked out good for me.
Yeah, definitely. It worked out good for Longhorn fans too.
Well, as I say, he really had it rolling in those days. A lot of good players, and his coaching, his preparation. I never went into a game, and I thought it would be possible for the team to be better prepared than he had gotten us, and covering different scenarios, and then just taking good guys and sharpening their skills. He and his assistant coaches were terrific at that.
Nice. And you mentioned that as quarterbacks you had to play other positions. You played a lot of defense, and that's kind of how you got involved with being a starter, correct?
That's right. It was the substitution rules were evolving during my years there, and they were impossible to follow, or they were difficult to follow. I think we had a accountant on the sideline trying to keep up with when you could go in and when you couldn't. But it worked out so that I, as a sophomore, did play all of the defensive safety, and Mike Cotton was our quarterback. So it was a great opportunity. People said, "Well, you're disappointed that you were playing defense," and I said, "Well, I was happy to be playing." And we had a great defense to be a part of those years.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess take us into that 63 season. You're coming off some disappointment in 62, and you start off ranked number 5.
Yeah, and I think we were all hopeful. The year before had been less than we had hoped for. We'd struggled, even though we won 9 of the 10 games. I think we never felt like we had hit our stride, and then we lost a game that in the Cotton Bowl. So, yeah, we knew we had work to do our senior year, and everybody came in enthusiastically. And as somebody said, starting at 5 is not bad. Where you don't want to start is at 1. So that worked out good. And then we had that situation that developed so that by the time we played Oklahoma, we'd moved up to number 2, and they were number 1.
Yeah, definitely. You were just rolling through competition at the beginning of the season. Tulane, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and then you faced that Oklahoma team ranked number 1. And talk about that setting. Yeah,
it was huge. Obviously, attention being played to that because in those days 1 and 2 didn't play that often with the conference setups, and even when it came bowl time. So it was a pretty big deal, and so there was a lot of attention directed to that game, and not only 1 versus 2, but 2 huge rivals like we were. So a lot of national attention, and I think the line on the game was probably about even. What helped us a lot that day is we got to kick off and move down steadily to the end zone for that first score. And I think that getting off to that start was really important to that day. I think we got some confidence in addition to the 7 points, but felt like that we could do it. And then our defense immediately started playing their usual outstanding ball at holding OU. So it ended up being, rather than a scary day, it went our way most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And so you walk away with that one, beating the number 1 team 28-7. Did y'all then have like a big head because you're facing unranked Arkansas, and it was not a cakewalk? Yeah,
that I don't think. Well, I know it was not overconfidence. One thing, when you're number 1, it was my experience that people usually played their best against you. You usually could count on getting the best game out of them. Particularly at that time, Texas and Arkansas were starting to dominate the conference. They had a great team the year before. They were mediocre that year, but we were playing them on their field, and they were excited. And so you just, you can't be sure about anything. Why we beat Oklahoma by 3 touchdowns and barely beat Arkansas, it just, that sometimes it works that way. But we did. We had a number of close games. Somebody even told me at the end of the year, so, well, I don't know about, yeah, sure, you guys finished 11-0 and national champions, but really you played a number of weak teams. And I mentioned in the book that my response to that was, everybody plays a few weak teams.
Right.
But we got to be number one that year by beating the then number one team, and we finished the year by beating the then number two team, both by 3 touchdowns. So I didn't think we had anything to apologize about.
No. I think 5 of the 6 games after you became number one were one-score games against non-ranked teams, but they were all rivals. So, you look next, you had Rice, and that was a real close game too. And again, it's an in-state rival.
And Rice always played well against Texas year after year, whether they had a good team, mediocre team, no matter. They always played good ball against Texas, and sometimes it's unexplainable. I mean, how on earth could we lose to TCU in '61 at home? We're 25-point favorites, and it happens. And so you've got to win a lot of close ones. You've got to have some luck, and then a lot of things go into it. But we had all those things that year, and got through.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how strong programs like Rice and Baylor were at that time. If you look at the Baylor game, talk about that one, because that was a one-score game that caught a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, I think particularly surprised, although some of us that knew our defensive players weren't surprised, but I think maybe most of the other people were surprised that Baylor could go a game without scoring a point. They had pro-style offense. They had scored many touchdowns. Their quarterback was leading the nation in completions, I think, and had one of the top receivers. So, you expected, and even as good as our defense was, you thought, well, you're still going to have to score probably quite a few points, because even a good defense is not going to hold those guys too low on the scoreboard. And as it turns out, our defensive guys held probably the top offensive passing team in the country to 0 points. And Baylor had a good defense that year too. They weren't just offense, so they were an all-around good team. And we were only able to get 1 touchdown, but it turned out to be enough. And
if you could talk about that key interception against Baylor.
Yeah, as I said, I had only been out on a few that complicated switching of substitution rules, so I hadn't really played defense that year, but I had played a lot the prior 2 years. Mm-hmm. And the guy that was playing safety for us, Jim Hudson, had a really outstanding game and a terrific season up to that point. So it didn't even cross my mind that I might stay in there. And I don't think Coach Campbell ever really said, well, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I think maybe just at the last second, maybe had a hunch or something, and told Coach Royal to leave me in there. But I've also said that I'm confident had they left Hudson in there, he would have made the same play.
Nice. So you get out of there, then you face TCU, and that's one of the games where there was no doubt y'all were going to win that one and blank them again. So 2 weeks in a row, no score.
Yeah, as I've said many times since we've been talking, that our defensive team was as strong as any in the nation. So you didn't expect teams to get many points against us, and it had worked. It worked out that way.
Definitely, and then Texas A&M is standing in the way of what looks like you've got a chance again. Talk about that game because it was a nail-biter.
Yeah, that's right. We got to the basically the same point almost where we'd been 2 years earlier, and we're number one. We're playing a team that's having a mediocre season. We are playing them on their home turf, but still, you obviously expect to be a win. And it was one of those days again where things happen, and they had a couple of big plays, and we struggled on offense. The field was a mess. It had a good bit of rain, and a lot of it had made its way to the turf, so it was a sloppy field to play on. Now, you know, they'll be quick to tell you that both teams were playing on the same field, so it wasn't penalizing us. But it was the kind of offense we ran. It hampered us, but nevertheless, they were fired up and played great ball, and we got in there to the end, toward the end of the game, and we were still trailing, and we didn't, we couldn't, even if we got a good drive going, we didn't have a lot of time. So Coach Royal, I suppose you could, not unlike maybe Coach Campbell's decision, that quickly decided we need to speed this up. And we were fortunate to have Tommy Wade as a backup quarterback. If he had gone to a school, there weren't many of them, but like Baylor, he would have been one of the top players in the country because he was as good a passer, I think, anybody probably out there. But we didn't pass very much, so we didn't get to showcase it. But Coach Royal knew what he could do and got him in there for that last drive, and he performed the way we expected, completed those important passes, and drove it down to the 1 yard line. Then Coach Royal sent me back in, and I claim he said this when he saw me coming out onto the field to replace him when he had taken us to the 1 yard line. He said, "I can't believe it. Good grief. It's only a yard to go." And I told him later, well, the only thing he missed out on was going face first into 6 inches of mud for the touchdown. But it was close, and there were a couple times they intercepted him once, and the guy started running back toward us, and I think he tried to lateral the ball and fumbled, and we recovered it, and so Tommy had another chance, and then there was almost an interception in the end zone, which that was a close call, and it would have been, I don't know if those of us who were seniors could have stood the heartbreak of that happening again when we looked like we were for sure the national champions.
Nice. So you end the regular season 10-0 with that win over A&M, and you move on to the Cotton Bowl. You alluded to earlier, number 1, Texas facing number 2, Navy and Roger Staubach. This had to be just a heck of a big news item.
That's right. And it was I think it was good for us. We were playing a good team. This was our third trip in a row to the Cotton Bowl, and it wasn't as exciting event in itself as it is the first time you go, but we were excited to be there because that meant we were the conference champion. And New Navy had a good team, but what really I think helped a lot was that there were a lot of doubters I think particularly in the Northeast that didn't think that we deserved to be number 1, and one of the sports writers up there gave us a pretty hard critique that made its way down to us, and I think that was an additional incentive that helped us play our best game that day. And again, our defense, Roger said he hadn't been hit that hard in his career. They shut their offense down completely.
Nice. So UT walks away with the national championship. You end your football career with the national championship. talk about what came next for you.
Well, during the season, I hadn't really had any thoughts of pro ball. I had not played very much defense. Well, I hadn't played. I hadn't played hardly any, and we obviously didn't run a pro type attack, so I hadn't given it thought and was planning on heading to graduate school. But as I mentioned in one of the stories in the book, that I think because of that, maybe the attention that the interception Baylor game brought, and people look back and said, oh, well, the guys played defense for 3 years and they've won all the games, so take a look at him. So I think that was the reason that I got drafted. And then there were two leagues, AFL and NFL, were competing then for players, so guys had more leverage than they'd had in the past, and I think a guy that Green Bay had drafted as a defensive back signed with the AFL, so I was able to get a good deal from them, and to make it something that I couldn't turn down. So I did that, signed a contract with them, ended up them sending me down to Dallas really for the season, and finished the season there, and then went on to graduate school. But it was a wonderful break for me because I got enough money to not only go to graduate school but to get married, so that worked out good.
Nice. And so what was your career after football ended? After
graduate school, I went. The Vietnam conflict was raging, and so I got a commission and ended up instead of in Vietnam in Germany for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And when I got out of the Army, I went to work in investment banking in New York and Dallas for 5 years, and then when the oil market picked up, prices finally moved off of the low levels, I came to Mississippi and got in the oil business, and then done that ever since.
Nice. Well, I mentioned your book, Longhorns and Tall Tales. I tell you, I love that book. I read it nonstop, and I normally don't do that. Normally takes me a long time to read a book, but it was such interesting stuff. If you could talk about how you came to write that book.
Well, as I mentioned in the book, in the beginning, that really my motivator was my son-in-law, Rich Terry, who, as we've laughed about, he heard all those stories more than once, and I think he said, actually, first time I heard them, I thought a lot of them were pretty funny. You ought to, while you still got your memory, you ought to write them down. And I said, well, maybe, but didn't. And then, I don't know, a year or two later, he said, I'm not saying you're getting old, but this would be a good time for you to do it. So I did, and I enjoyed looking back on those times and reliving them. It was my failing memory was challenged me sometimes, but I overall enjoyed it, and was glad that he talked me into doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. Your writing style is very conversational. It's very just like I'm sitting on the porch talking with you about it, and I can't recommend it enough to people.
Well, I appreciate that. Somebody else said you almost waited too late for there still to be people around that had heard your name, but we did sell a few, and I appreciate your comments, and as I say, it was I in the long run got a kick out of doing it.
Nice. Well, Duke Carlisle, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me and sharing some of this fascinating story.
Well, I thank you for having me. I've enjoyed visiting with you, Chris.
want to thank Duke Carlisle for sitting down with me and sharing some of his story. I really enjoy these stories. Be sure to grab a copy of his book, Longhorns and Tall Tales. That's right. It's on Amazon.com. There's also a link in the show notes. Also, do us a favor and share this show with a friend. This collaboration between the Texas Legacy Support Network and the Lone Star Podcast Network is one of the favorite things I get to do these days. I love sharing these stories out on the top Texas-based podcast network. I love working with the message that the Texas Legacy Support Network sends. Please go over to their website, texaslsn.org, for more detail about each of the people we mention in these shows, including great photos. But this show is just the tip of the iceberg. Over at texaslsn.org, there is so much more University of Texas athletics information on the site. And their mission is a great one. That's texaslsn.org. Hey, thank you again for taking the time and sharing this show out. The Texas Legacy Support Network show is now available on iTunes, on Stitcher, on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, Google Play, and now Amazon Prime Music. That's right. Amazon now carries podcasts, and this is one of the great ones they're carrying. And once again, I want to thank you for tuning in, for giving me some of your attention, some of your time, to help spread the stories of these great UT athletes. And if you want to help make sure that we are continue to able to tell these stories, to bring these to more people, we are looking for sponsorship. Yes, if you have a business or a message you want to get in front of this rabid, loyal fan base, reach out to me, Chris Doelle, 713-269-4620, and I will get you all set up. Or if you even know somebody who might be interested, get them in touch with me. And as always, you can find out more about any of these stories over at the website texaslsn.org. That's the Texas Legacy Support Network, texaslsn.org. It is jam-packed with stories like these and tons of other great stories about UT athletics. And as always, keep reaching for the stars and don't stop till you get there.